Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inkyma's marketing strategy. And this is a really big deal. This is episode 50 for us. And the reason I say us is that today my guest is my awesome podcast producer, Duane France with Headspace and Timing. So we're going to chat today a little bit about using podcasts as a marketing tactic, because he's got such a wealth of knowledge, and I really couldn't have done any of this without him past the first month or so. It's really the reason why I'm still able to keep going through this, and I love doing it. So as usual, before we get into the meat of the content, just a little bit of housekeeping. Duane and I are going to talk about things. We're going to mention links, probably mention past episodes. All of those links are going to be in the show notes, and anything else we feel like is going to be important. Now, this is a podcast, but it's also a video cast. I'm probably making that up in the moment, but we're going with it. So if you want to watch us, interact with us, definitely go to the YouTube channel for Inkyma, or go to the website and look at the episode. So Inkyma is spelled Inkyma, either search for the website or just go to YouTube, search for us, and we'll come right up. Okay, so now let's get into it. Hi, Duane, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Audrey. Thank you.
Excellent.
How are you?
I'm doing good too. It's bright and early for us here in sunny Colorado, which I like doing stuff early. So Duane, tell us a little bit about Headspace and Timing before we get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Headspace and Timing is my, essentially it's a consulting firm. And so after I retired from the Army in 2014, I became a clinical mental health counselor. And so Headspace and Timing, I've been podcasting since 2017, blogging since earlier than that. And Headspace and Timing was the name of the original podcast that we developed, as well as the blog. And really the goal of the company and my personal goal at that point, and a lot of the other things that I do, is helping organizations understand how to address mental health and behavioral health concerns for service members, veterans, and their families. That's what the original blog and podcast were focused on. For people who may not be familiar with the military, Headspace and Timing is referring to a particular type of equipment. So we in the military, we have the M2 machine gun. It's one of the largest machine guns, and all branches of services use it: Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Army. And so it's this giant weapon. It's 6 foot long. It's destructive. But the thing is in some of the older models, of course, for it to work properly, you had a very small thing called a headspace and timing gauge, and it's about the size of my thumb. And so if the headspace, the space between the head of the carriage and then the barrel isn't set correctly, and the timing, if the way that it strikes the bullet isn't timed properly, then this giant weapon is totally useless. And that's the same thing for service members and veterans, is that we are, you can drop us in the mud or kick us around and knock us down a hill and we'll still operate. But if our headspace and our timing, the way that we're interacting in the world, isn't set up correctly, then we're not as effective as we could be. And so essentially from the early content creation days of the blog and the podcast to now, I do consultation for authors and content producers and things like that, specifically related to mental health, suicide prevention, and behavioral health.
Which I think is so important. We've talked about this. I don't know if the listeners know, but you were in the Army. I am a Marine brat, right? My dad, my uncle, I was born in 29 Palms. So that is a topic that hits super close to home for me. So one, I appreciate that you're doing that so much to help all of our veterans and servicemen. Give us the website before we move on, right? Because I think that's important.
Sure. So pretty much everything is found at the home base of veteranmentalhealth.com. That's all one word, veteranmentalhealth.com.
And the link will be in the show notes. No worries. All right, so let's talk about podcasting. So I got into this kind of like, by the seat of my pants. I knew I wanted to get out there, share this content with business owners. And I chose podcasting because I already had a blog. I was always doing that, but I wanted another vehicle. So I kind of see podcasting from a marketing perspective as a tactic, as content marketing. In my brain, it's no different than writing a blog article or posting out to social media. It's just another avenue. And now we're doing this great thing where it's audio and certain episodes are going to be video. So I think that that's pretty cool. And so, like, you and I chit chatted. I remember when we first started this about, how this is going to work and what kind of content should be. And then we changed some stuff around. So it's really been a great synergistic endeavor between the two of us. So I think it's going really well. How do you think it's going? Because, being a podcast producer, being the person like talking on screen, and you look at the stats and you're like, is this good? What's this? I don't know if this is any good. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how you think how we're doing.
Yeah, I think that one, just and I don't even want to say it's a diversion away from content creation like blogging, but it's, like you said, it's a natural extension. You were already
Yes.
doing it. But it's not as well known as blogging, right? People have been blogging for 15, 20 years. I mean, even going back to posting on message boards in the 90s, in the beginning of blogging. So there's a lot of understanding around blogging as content marketing. There's obviously a lot of understanding around, like, for example, YouTube and video as far as content. But I think that people don't think about podcasting as an adjunct to either hosting a vlog or having a written blog on the website. And I think that your courage, really, or just the idea of this is another area in which that we can share our knowledge. It's encouraging, but it's also easier than a lot of people think. There's the idea of, and it's interesting to me, people, like, they're much more comfortable on video, but you stick a microphone in my face and people are just like, I don't know. So and I think we shared this as we were talking about this being your 50th episode. Most podcasts don't get past 10 episodes or even 20 episodes, right? So having the longevity, if you think about releasing a show once a week, you've been doing this for a year. And the more experience you have, the better it gets. One thing, this is probably the third or the fourth show that I've been involved with producing. And one of the things I say is never go back and listen to your first episodes. Let the listeners go back and listen to their first episodes, but we listen to them with different ears. And as we continue, we get better and better, and we have more experience, just like anything else that we do. Same thing with going back to someone reading their early blogs and the mistakes that you now recognize that you would have made then. Podcasting is the same thing. But I just want to congratulate you on hitting 50 episodes. It's a pretty big deal.
Thanks. It is. It feels like it's a big deal. And, I can tell why a lot of podcasters don't stay with it. You need some sort of motivation. You look and you say, wow, great, one person listened, or I only have 3 followers. I think what I bring to the table is that I understand how long it takes for content, regardless of what it is, to organically grow. Mm-hmm. So it is a long game. It is a really, really long game. But with the blog, with my blog and with customers' blogs, we get 2 years into it, and then we see these great, fantastic pops in the content. Like, all of a sudden this thing skyrockets because of what happened. So I'm like, it's coming, it's happening. And then, of course, talking to people, right? I share it, I talk to people, and I'm like, listen to this episode, because they ask me questions. I'm like, I got an episode for that. And they're like, wow, that's great. And they go and listen to it, and I get feedback. They're like, that was so good. That was so helpful. I get a lot of the so's, but it's really great hearing that feedback. And the other thing I think a podcast does that a blog doesn't do as much anymore is it's kind of like it increases your credibility and your authority tenfold. Mm-hmm. As soon as I tell someone I have a podcast, right? they go, oh, okay. Like, cause they think it's really hard to produce. But I think the other thing too is, if you're going to put yourself out there in a podcast and talk and that kind of thing, you have to have a certain level of content confidence in what you're talking about. So I think it's one of those separators. So if someone's going to do this, I would say, yeah, definitely do the blog, do the podcast, because they kind of support and help each other. And I really feel like that not only has this allowed me to help people, but when I'm talking to potential clients, it helps close the deal.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And you think about, let's say somebody in 2001 saying, "Well, I have a blog," and people are like, "Oh, you have a blog?" And like there was a measure of your. This is another evolution in sort of thought leadership. Not that I really, value that phrase, but this idea of you have things to share, and podcasting. And again, podcasting's been around early days, 2010 or even as early as 2008. But really has grown exponentially over the last 4 to 5 years. And it does give a measure of legitimacy, even to the legitimacy of, well, I wouldn't do that. So kudos for you for doing that. But then
Yeah.
also it's sort of like that audio FAQ, right? I think I've heard you mention it before on episodes where you say, well, this is something that I continually am asked over and over again by business owners. And so if I'm continually asked this, then obviously there's more people out there that aren't asking this question that need this information, that you can then capture it. And so just like we're always doing Google searching, you want to be one of the things that come up whenever somebody looks for that particular question. And so on the content creation side, I think is very valuable. But then also just the ease of use for podcasting. If you're reading a blog, you're reading, something on a website, right? If you're watching a video on YouTube, many people are watching this, but you got to be static, right? That's the one thing that you're doing. With podcasts, it's really a multi-use type of situation in which, people are like, I was listening to an audiobook during my workout this morning, or while you're running or walking the dogs or doing the laundry or making dinner or something like that. So it's really, while you're driving to work, you're consuming content. And so it's a way to, say, multitask, but also to be able to access the medium of audio only while we're doing other things. I don't even listen to radio much anymore because it's usually podcasts and audiobooks.
I'm the same way. I'm either audiobooks, podcasts, some music, something to that effect. What's interesting is I'm like a multi-channel person. Like I consume all content at those three levels. I read books, blogs, articles. I'll watch YouTube videos. We talked about that. Like I'm a huge YouTube fan. And then I also like to listen to just audio. Same thing. It's like cleaning the house, something to that effect. And I swap between all of it. So I think making content versatile is, I think, the other or the next evolutionary step. So if someone's got a blog, maybe they're podcasting, and they write a book, that they've hit the trifecta. And they shouldn't be afraid to overlap the content.
Right.
Because
or repurpose the content,
yes,
right? I mean, it's
exactly.
so I've written 3 books and I don't know how to write books because I compiled a series of blog articles into 3 separate books. And then I've also purposed blog articles into podcast episodes. And then I've repurposed podcast episodes into mini blog articles and a number of different things. In that a series that I did last year on military and veteran suicide prevention, we're developing the emergent themes, and that's going to come out as a book. And so I think that there's this idea of not having the content separate, but it can actually be repurposed in a number of different ways.
Absolutely. I love the term repurposed, right? Because then you can take that and then you have push vehicles, right? You've got newsletters, you've got posting it up to your Google My Business, which is infinite. That's like a whole nother episode that I got to put together for Google My Business. You push it there, you push it via social, all your different channels. So yeah, it's creating the content across multiple platforms and then pushing it out. And one person's going to find it in one way. They're not going to find it in all 8 or 9 Or if they do, great, because then they're just really engaged with your content, which is not a bad thing. So that's kind of where my brain is going. And like the idea of a book has been sitting in the back of my mind. And I'm like, okay, I gotta take a breath a minute, and then I'll think about the book thing. But yeah, it's sitting back there to publish a book. We'll see.
And I think that's where and it's about what you're most comfortable with too,
Yeah.
right? You and I had talked about video content. I'm not a video guy, right? The joke is I got a voice for radio and a face for radio or what have you. But I think for me and my the way I like to develop content is very deliberate, and I edit, right? And with
Yeah.
blogs, you can go back and make sure, is this saying what I'm going to say? And same thing with podcasts, is you can be very deliberate. But with video, especially if it's unedited video, you get what you get, right? And that's just
Right.
not something that I'm necessarily normally comfortable with as a content producer. And so podcasts are another way for people to be able to just get their information out there, because they're like, oh, I could never do a YouTube live or something like that. I've tried it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's fingernails on a chalkboard for me, because again, not to say that I like to be edited and polished and stuff like that, but just the spontaneity of it, I usually like to develop my thoughts in a different way. And so I think that podcasting gives people the ability to really, as you've said, make sure that they're aligned with their brand, make sure that they're getting the message that they want to get across and the words that are hitting their customers. That it's a way that a lot of people could do those things easily. And once people get over the intimidation factor, either they do it like I did it myself, is except for the first 3 or 4 episodes of my first podcast back in 2017, I've done all the editing and producing and content writing and things like that. Or like you, that you have the idea, you want to record it, but then also there's the technical skills of editing and producing and things like that. Just like you may have a digital virtual assistant, or you may hire an editor for your blog. Just finding someone to be able to partner with to take the recordings and your thoughts and make it something that's accessible in the podcast space. It's not as difficult as people might think.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. This partnership between us has made it so that I can get to episode 50, which I think I mentioned at the top. But so I create an outline. I don't write out what I'm going to say. I have a general idea. I like to riff a little bit. I have years and years of public training, in-person training background, where you don't get a second take when you're sitting in front of 50 people. So I'm a little bulletproof that way. So I like to riff a little bit. Then I record. I try to do it all in one shot, right? Again, that's how I like to do it. And takes me 30-35 minutes with setup. The whole thing's under an hour. And then I shoot it off to you, and you do your magical fairy things with it, where, you take out my flubs, you make everything sound really, really good. And then, yeah. And then Jessica, my assistant admin extraordinaire, and then she writes up the show notes, pulls in the transcript. And what we've learned over time is, like, let's not try to go all kinds of perfect with the transcript, right? Let's just let it come through. We say it's a rough transcript so that it gets across. Otherwise, it would take a million years to get something out. I mean, think about how many words you say in a half an hour, right? You're looking at thousands. Editing that down was taking her forever. So we do the rough transcript, all the links in the show notes, and then it goes out every week. And so we're kind of in a rhythm now. I think the key, though, is the process. The process makes it super easy to just keep doing it over and over. Because without that, I think we kind of get backed up and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's actually not that hard if you put a process in place and you have someone doing things for you as part of it.
And I think the idea is not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? People
Right.
listen to, when they say podcast, they're thinking like a highly produced NPR style, and again, and I listen to those shows too. I'm not a huge fan of the overly produced. because it takes a large team to be able to do that very, very well. But when they're writing a blog, they're not thinking I'm writing for the Washington Post or the New York Times, right? They write a blog and they do as best as they can. And obviously there's certain things that go along with that, but they're not thinking that I'm, an accomplished author that is doing this for a year when they're writing a blog. But somehow people have it in their minds that to be a podcaster, I need to be, John Lee Dumas or something like that, where it's a matter of, John Lee Dumas was a beginner at one point at some time. And so I think really just getting things off the ground and getting things started the way that you did, and then obviously wanting to continue that because understanding the long-term value of it. I think that just like anything else, this is an example that not a lot of business people think of as an opportunity. I think in the very beginning, as some of our early partnerships, there was a show about barbecue tips, and it was getting a lot of downloads, right? The other show that was in the
love
partnership
our
we were
barbecue.
doing, that just every week he was sharing, a different thing on how to barbecue this or how to base that or brine this or something like that. And people are looking for that kind of content.
Absolutely.
I'm not the barbecue master, right? He owned his own barbecue show. So that was an example of, or a barbecue store. So that was an example of a business owner who was providing content that was saying, hey, I'm going to listen to the barbecue guy. And when I'm in Colorado Springs and I want barbecue equipment, I'm going to go to the barbecue store and say, hey, I'm listening to you, barbecue guy. And that's where I think not a lot of business owners are thinking about this as another way to establish a brand identity.
Absolutely. And I firmly believe, I tell all my clients this, if you listen to my whole branding series, education is the fastest route to closing a client. If you educate someone, they're going to buy from you all day long because you're like-minded at that point. And I think what people have to remember is you're right. Done is better than perfect. And you got to remember your objective. Like, what are you trying to do with the blog, right? If you're trying to help people, if you're trying to give people information, they will accept it if it's the right content, and they're going to forgive everything else. They're going to forgive the fact that I trip over my tongue and maybe my audio quality is not quite perfect. Like it might not be in today's episode because I'm playing around with my audio. Dwayne's like, no, get your microphone out. But I will get there. So yeah, it's about what the content is about. And, I have it in the back of my mind. Like when people come to me and they were like, that episode was great. It was so helpful. I've shared it with everybody. I shared it with my boss. I shared it with these people. And then they come back and then all of a sudden they're like, what can you do for us? I'm like, there we go. That's the question I want to answer. And sometimes people aren't ready for me, right? But at least my long goal with this is that brand new company starts up. They're looking for good marketing. They find the podcast, they educate themselves, they do a really great job, and they get themselves 5 years into their business and they're ready to hand off their marketing, right? Hopefully they're going to come back to me because I'm the one that was with them via podcast for those last 5 years. So that's kind of like the long game for this. I'm really long game.
And I think that none of that would happen if you don't put yourself out there. If a business owner is not out there on social media, and here's an example of, I had the honor and the privilege and really the joy from a kid of the 80s of being able to consult on a comic book for that Hasbro was putting out for G.I. Joe, right? So an Army guy,
That's so
right?
cool.
But the author of the series at that point was doing a special issue of a G.I. Joe comic book specifically on combat stress and post-traumatic stress disorder and suicide, like mental health. And he found me on social media as a result of my blogs and my content and things like that, reached out to me and said, hey, would you mind if you ask some questions? And turned out to be an opportunity for me to consult, talk about some different things in the script. You should say this, you shouldn't say that. This is on target. This is a little off target. And ultimately that issue won a national media award for reporting on suicide. If I hadn't been blogging and podcasting and putting myself out there on social media as someone who has a certain expertise in this, he wouldn't have found me. The issue still would have been written. He would have found another consultant perhaps, but that was an opportunity, I think, that if we don't put ourselves out there and show ourselves as certain experts, then we're not going to receive the benefit, the personal benefit of helping out in those kind of things, much less the professional benefit from business owners.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing I noticed in the last month from this podcast is I've got people that I've never met in my entire life. They don't live near me, reaching out, asking to be on the podcast. And I was like, whoa, like I've made it.
That's how you know.
Yeah, exactly. And so I literally have things I have to go through today as of this recording, respond back, get them scheduled, especially now that we have this vehicle to offer them to, right? Because it's a partnership, it's a give and take. It's like, yeah, I want you on my podcast, but you want something that you can share with your tribe over there that's worthwhile. And then we both win, which is really, really cool. Well, Duane, as usual, the time has flown. Any last thoughts before we wrap this up and I do my little exit spiel?
No, I think that, again, congratulations on making it this far. Episode 50 is a big deal. Episode 100 is going to be a big deal. Episode 300 is going to be a big deal, right?
We're going to start planning those now, right?
Yeah, and I think that it's important to celebrate milestones. This is a big milestone for you and the podcast, and just want to congratulate you. And I look forward to continuing on the journey with you.
Me too. And I couldn't have done it without you. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So here at Inkyma, we like to give back to the business community. I provide a free 45-minute consultation to talk about whatever you want to talk about. So if you're now inspired to start your own blog, we'll talk about it. I'll introduce you to Duane and you can get rolling. But maybe you want to talk about blogging, other types of content marketing, whatever you want, that's what that 45 minutes is for. So just go to the website, inkyma.com. That's INKYMA.com. And in the upper right-hand corner, you click the schedule a marketing evaluation button, get on the calendar, and we are good to go. If you have just a question or maybe you have a suggestion for an episode, I'd love to hear it and I will get back to you. So if you found this episode helpful, share it to someone in your business community that you think might like it too. Because if we are all growing and thriving, then that lifts up the entire small business community, and we are the backbone of this country. So let's keep rocking it and have an amazing day.